Right guys, we have some pretty exciting information from Jon Prosser, who claims that apparently there are some blue MacBook Air prototypes somewhere in Apple's HQ, which basically means that yes, much like the M1 iMac, we're about to see a bunch of funky colors for the MacBook Air 2. So let's delve into the specifics of this leak. So basically you might remember that Jon Prosser was the first person to mention that colors were coming back to the iMac, and now the same source tells him that yes, Apple is planning to do the same thing with the M2 MacBook Air. Now this seems perfectly plausible because, much like Jon's source mentions, Apple used to have a clear distinction between their consumer and prosumer focused devices, which we have been missing for some time. For example, the M1 MacBook Air and the M1 MacBook Pro are very similar in terms of performance, but also the overall aesthetic of the device, because obviously, apart from the snazzy gold and the tapered design, the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro are very similar, especially in space grey and silver. And so yes, much like we saw with the iBook and the PowerBook, I would actually appreciate some visual differences with the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro in the near future. And so yeah, give the Air as many colors as possible and keep the MacBook Pro pretty serious and boring looking for prosumers. Now Jon does mention he's only seen a blue version, but of course, I'm pretty sure Apple's going to give us a variety of colors, and the fact he mentions a blue does lead me to believe that we're going to see the iMac colors on the MacBook Air. Now personally, I would love to see the saturated colors we see on the back of the iMacs with these MacBook Airs. I think that would be absolutely gorgeous. Now Jon does not address the whole white bezel issue, so we don't really know what's going to happen, but of course, if it's going to be like the iMac and iBook days, then it's very likely the MacBook Air adopts the white bezels we see with the iMac 2. And by the way guys, I used to be a white bezel hater, but I'm actually starting to like the design of the iMac, and so seeing these renders of the MacBook Air with white bezels actually looks pretty neat, I can't lie. So yeah, I actually wouldn't be against white bezels. I do think they would complement the bright colors a little better. However, I wonder if Apple will keep around the space gray version of the MacBook Air, because obviously with the iMac, there was no space gray version of the regular iMac, and so they could justify not including that color with the 24-inch, whereas the MacBook Air does have a space gray version right now, and obviously the MacBook Air is way more popular than the iMac, and so I do sort of feel like Apple has to include that to keep part of their demographic happy, since people are still quite split on the whole white bezel issue, and so I don't think people are going to be happy if the MacBook Air solely comes with white bezels. There has to be an all black option. Now colors are great, but of course you might be wondering, what are the features of this new MacBook Air? Well, of course, Mark Gurman did give us a few tidbits before, and basically he says it should be a thinner and lighter design, so something like the 12-inch MacBook in my opinion, which would be really nice because I love the 12-inch MacBook. The design was ahead of its time, and so of course, if Apple could resurrect that with a larger display and new funky colors, I think Apple might be onto a winning product. I can see that selling in the bucket loads. Now in terms of I/O, it's not so exciting because unlike the MacBook Pros, which are literally gaining every port that one needs, the MacBook Air is going to keep the same layout as the current generation version, so 2 Thunderbolt ports, but of course, with MagSafe, which is kinda great. Now we come to price, and basically Mark Gurman says that this new MacBook Air should be a higher end model, so the M1 version we have today will stay in the lineup as a lower end version. Now of course, price hikes are to be expected when the design is seeing a drastic change, and obviously we're seeing mini LED on this MacBook Air 2, which, as we saw with the iPad Pro, the mini LED panel is going to add around $100 to the price, so I can see that being another reason as to why the Air has to be more expensive. But you see, the issue Apple's going to have with this MacBook Air is the M1 version is just so good, and even a year from now it's going to be an absolutely great machine, so wouldn't that put people off from buying the more expensive M2 version? I guess Apple has to be pretty careful in terms of how they price this new MacBook Air, but my predictions are that the base M1 MacBook Air drops to $899, that will be very appealing to students, and then of course the M2 MacBook Air goes to around $1049, just so the higher end Air is still enticing and doesn't creep up to base MacBook Pro pricing. Especially considering Apple did not give us a price hike with the iMac, even though it is a pretty major redesign, I do think it's likely that because of the savings they make with Apple Silicon, they can of course keep the price hike to a minimum. Anyways, let me know in the comments below, are you planning to buy this M2 MacBook Air? Anyways, thank you for watching, make sure to like and subscribe for the latest Apple news and rumours. Check out the video in the icon above about AirPods 3, and on that note, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya, peeps!